The fact of the matter is, when we walk through those doors, at that moment, it's not about us anymore. It's about God.
This is Father Neil Edlin. I'm the rector of Mary Magdalene Church, Mary Magdalene Anglican Church in Orange, California. And I'm here with Father Paul Castellano. Essentially, he's written a book about worship. Do you think that now this book is going to be accessible to everyone? I mean, not to buy, but to read.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah, the content. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Will pastors benefit from it? I'm guessing I will.
My hope is that, and I have to admit that when I first wrote it, my intention was to make it a popular treatment, so that any evangelical interested in these things could pick it up off the shelf and benefit from it. Any Anglican who wanted to investigate their tradition, any Roman, any Eastern Orthodox person who wanted to get a handle on maybe a unique view could pick it up and say, oh yeah, okay. I have been told by my editors that when they did an algorithm to determine the reading level, it's actually about senior level high school, college. So I think for the most part, I would like to think for the most part that it's accessible to any student of the Bible. Doesn't have to be formally, any student of the Bible who has a knowledge of basic biblical information. You know, they're familiar with the term covenant, even if they may not know all of the intricacies, but they're familiar with covenant. They understand what it means to talk about communion. I defined the term, so it's not as if they're going to be completely lost. But I believe that they'll benefit, if for no other reason than to be exposed to something a little bit different. I think pastors will benefit from it. On the one hand, if they're within our tradition, it may more sharply focus their understanding, or it may present within our tradition a slightly different churchmanship with which they're used to. If they're not from our tradition, it gives a very specific presentation of how one particular Anglican church incorporated all of this. And it will provide for the quote unquote advanced student a number of chapters that deal with linguistic issues. Now, I had to include a lot of language material, not a lot. There are 3 chapters that deal with it. Sure. But I had to include some of that because there are issues such as the difference between elder and bishop. That question had to be addressed. So there's an entire chapter on that. It's probably the most technical chapter, but it shouldn't be too daunting that you can't understand the argument. The issue with pleroma and fulfillment and what does that mean? That's dealt in a specific chapter as well. However, I don't think it's above anyone's head. So I will say this, just to let you know, there's some controversial things in there. If you're not familiar with the issues, I may be actually creating a problem that didn't exist for you in the first place. But these are the issues that we deal with all the time, and I thought it would be necessary to put something like this out there, because you know as well as I do that the state of the church, Christianity, the state of Christianity today is abysmal. It's abysmal. We have so imbibed in what the culture tells us we should be doing that we don't understand. As you mentioned earlier, you alluded to it earlier, the fact of the matter is when we walk through those doors, at that moment, it's not about us anymore. It's about God. And therefore, as Kierkegaard pointed out, God's the audience. The minister is the ministers are the directors, and the congregation are the players. See, we're supposed to be giving something to God. We're not supposed to be sitting back and being emotionally moved by a really phenomenal band. We're not supposed to sit there and listen to somebody, and this is going to probably tweak somebody, but I'm going to say it anyway. The fact of the matter is the church historically has always identified word and sacrament, word and sacrament. And if you don't like the word sacrament, word and communion. word, and baptism. Those are integral. Calvin said, where the word is preached, the sacraments must be administered. Where the sacrament is presented, the word must accompany it. So they're never separate. But yet, what do we see? We see 45, 50, 55 minutes, 1 hour, wonderful biblical theological conversations that completely leave the visible sacrifice of Christ, the visible atonement that we see in communion, the visible inclusion into the church, baptism, leaves it out. So in that sense, I'm hoping that this book is at least it'll start the conversation. Let me be humble and say, I hope it starts a conversation.
I think it's important. I think it's good to have that conversation going. And I think that anybody who reads this is going to find a fuller understanding of worship. I mean, I think it's going to enhance their worship if they really understand its source and what it's really supposed to look like, and how then they can kind of gauge, is my church doing that? Is my church really following what I'm finding in Father's book here?
I actually used that phrase, by the way. Thank you very much. From your lips to God's ears.
Okay.
Yeah. Is this what my church does? I use a phrase very similar to that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I appreciate your time. I'm really excited. I think that anybody who out there is watching this, and is, especially if you're on the clergy side, I think it really is important for any clergyman to have on their bookshelf. I think it's an important thing of any style of worship.
Even if you don't agree.
Even if you don't agree, of course, yeah. And laity as well. I'm glad that it's written on a level that I think most people will be able to understand this. And I think it's important, again, especially for the laity, tend to be, the clergy are usually the ones that go to school. We get the education, we get all the schooling, and the laity do not get that benefit. And so it's up to us to teach them. So if it's a book like this on their bookshelf or in their hands, they're definitely going to get a better understanding of what worship looks like, what the church has been doing for a long time, and maybe a kind of a push in some places to maybe get back to that. So.
And the thing that I would like to conclude with, and then I'll let you wrap it up. Sure. The thing that I'd like to conclude with is the presentation. The subtitle of the book is a biblical, theological, historical introduction to the traditional church and her worship. This is not merely an Anglican expressing Anglican tradition, because I will be blunt. There will be brethren of ours who will take issue with this. That's why it is rooted in a biblical presentation that begins in heaven.